One of the weirdest nicknames I've heard in fighting. There's people have some strange nicknames at times, but the Lemon Killer. What do you even make of that? What is that about?
I don't even know what that means, but I'm gonna squeeze him like a lemon on the day we fight, and he's gonna pop.
Only on SportsGrid.
We're going to get rid of all the badness, if you will, over the past few decades for the Raiders and set yourself up for the future. It's a horrible job to take if you expect to win, but it's not a bad paying gig, so go ahead and take it.
With an owner in Mark Davis who has continued to make bad decision after bad decision. Does Pete Carroll leave a culture behind that Joe Brady in 2 to 3 years takes over?
The Early Line. Only on SportsGrid.
He did nothing for 5 weeks. So he's becoming his brother. So I don't want to hear about how great TJ Watt is with his 0 playoff wins. And he's the first guy to admit it. He comes right out and says, I've never won a playoff game. I don't matter. All right, at least we all know who the best player on the team is. It's George Pickens. If you don't believe that, well, then screw you too.
Pharrell, Coast to Coast. Only on SportsGrid.
We'll see if they get McCain back. Kelly Oubre, Yabusele's been good. Caleb Martin's a defensive specialist. Andre Drummond can still give you, almost a double-double at any point. I can't go south on this team. And now you're giving it to me at 2-1 to make the playoffs? To be in the Final 8? Folks, give me the Philadelphia 76ers to make the playoffs at plus 210.
Betting above the rim. Only on SportsGrid.
We welcome you to hour number 2, live right here on this Monday on the Early Line on SportsGrid and all across that Spiz Grizz network. He is Donnie Rightside. I am Ben Stevens. Super Bowl 59, 13 days away on a Sunday night in New Orleans in the Big Easy, and a rematch from just a couple of years ago out in the desert in Phoenix between the Eagles and the Chiefs. How it came together, that was the story of hour number 1. What it means now in the early look at the odds for the biggest game of any NFL season. We'll talk Philly and KC and the rematch in just a matter of moments. A lot to break down, DRS, in this second hour, and I'm sure we'll have similar conversations every step of the way over these next 13 days.
Analyzing half-yard movements on the passing props and the running back props, and the game changed by 2 cents. What do you think that means in the grand overall scheme of things? Yes, get ready for it. But at least it's much more enjoyable from my end here with the Philadelphia Eagles in it, and you can analyze. Now, the one thing I do want to apologize to the public here is we didn't want Kansas City in this. Not a single person outside of the state of Missouri and Kansas themselves in the greater metro area wanted them in here. It's Taylor Swift, it's Andy Reid, it's Patrick Mahomes, it's Kelsey again at this point. So I do apologize there. But as you guys watch this show, we're all Eagles fans now. It's okay. The Buffs is pulling up. Get on. No price. Just get on. It's free of charge. We'll roll that bandwagon down to New Orleans. We'll handle the public here. Even Patriot fans, I'm hearing now, are Eagles fans saying, because you don't want to steal that thunder where now all of a sudden you're going to erase all those Tom Brady memories, all those championships, and go like, yeah, Tom Brady went to 10. Mahomes went to 12. Tom Brady won 7 championships. Mahomes now has 8 here. Oh, you guys never won back-to-back-to-back world championship here. We're going to handle that. Don't worry. The Philadelphia Eagles are going to handle their business. So even though we slapped you in Super Bowl 52, come on now. We'll pat you on the back now. Get on the ride. We're going to handle business here in the Super Bowl.
Yesterday during the NFC Championship game, Nick Foles, the Philly legend, up in a suite. They showed him on the broadcast. Tom said, listen, Nick, I'm just jealous of you. You caught the football. I did not. A throwback to Super Bowl 52 and Super Bowl 57. It was KC outlasting Philadelphia. We'll talk about the odds for that game, what we are seeing early for the Big Easy in just a moment. And we'll talk about the Eagles in the story of this season in just a few as well. It came up short yesterday, DRS for the Commanders. A historic run for Jaden Daniels in his first year in the NFL, and Dan Quinn his first year in Washington. But this season was such an overwhelming success. The future feels very, very bright in Landover, a team that entered the year with a win total of 6.5. I remember having the conversation, I like Jaden Daniels under the tutelage of Cliff Kingsbury. Dan Quinn has had great success as a head coach previously in the NFL. I think they can be pesky, maybe get to 7 wins. Not 12 of them in the regular season, in a playoff berth and an NFC championship game appearance for the first time since 1991. Donnie, you often look at things through your Philly lenses as it pertains to the NFC East. The disastrous move the Giants have made in their front office, the Dallas Cowboys hiring Brian Schottenheimer. Are you a little bit scared, although you got the last laugh for now yesterday in Philly, of this Commanders team on the come-up within the division?
I mean, it's not being scared here, but it looks like you're going to have a pretty good rivalry over the next couple of years. Reason being is with Jaden Daniels is a good quarterback. That's a decade probably in his prime. They're going to have to tangle with him, no doubt about it. But yes, we do laugh at teams like the Giants who have no hope and no future. The Dallas Cowboys just happy being the Dallas Cowboys. And quite frankly, if I was the rest of the NFC East, I'd rather petition and say, how exactly did the Cowboys get in the NFC East and benefit from all these big markets up here? Send them to the NFC South and watch that, franchise plummet into, wherever they're going to go into the depths of doom. But for me, I like Jaden Daniels. I really like Dan Quinn as a head coach. But here's the issue that you're going to run into, Ben, as every team does. What do you love about Jaden Daniels? Man, play calling really fits him well. Do you know within, 16 or 18 months from now, you're not going to have that offensive coordinator anymore. Why? He's going to get a head coaching job somewhere else, and you're not going to fire Dan Quinn to make sure your superstar offensive coordinator stays in town. It doesn't happen. That's the only downside. And yes, if a quarterback is that good, any really good offensive coordinator that's up for a job is going to get that and love that. But that's what I always look out for. How can a team sort of fall back? They have money to spend. They have cap space. They have a good front office now, which they never had in the past. They should be good. But I just look at Kingsbury and say, you better enjoy him while you have him, because after next year, he will be a head coach in the NFL again.
A historic season for Jaden Daniels, as you saw right there. Many, many, many rookie records in the NFL, regular or postseason. He is going to run away. I think they have already inscribed his name on the NFL Offensive Rookie of the Year award. Will there be a sophomore slump? We saw C.J. Stroud struggle in his second year after an exhilarating rookie campaign. We shall see. A lot of congruency. We expect to return to Washington this off season, but Cliff Kingsbury, to Donnie's point, has already said he would be interested in becoming a head coach once again in the NFL. Still one vacancy, if I'm not mistaken, where the Super Bowl will be played in New Orleans. A couple of offensive coordinators could be in the running that are now done with their season. Joe Brady in Buffalo, and of course, Cliff Kingsbury in Washington. A wildly successful year for the Commanders. And now that expectation, though, ramps up. And that is always a difficult thing to handle. You are no longer the hunters. You are the huntee. You are not expected to win 7 or 8 games and be a pesky thorn in the side. You are expected to contend once again for a conference championship. But if you are a fan of this Washington franchise, you are thrilled. You went through 2.5 decades with the worst owner in sports for a variety of reasons in Dan Snyder. He's gone. Bright future outside the nation's capital, to say the least. DRS for the Eagles was a tumultuous 18 months or so, with how last year ended, dropping 5 of their final 6, including that wild card game in Tampa. This year, an uneasy start. 2-2 record, some conversation in the bye week about Nick Sirianni and how things were doing in Philadelphia. And here are the odds step by step. The Eagles entered the year with the third best price to win the NFC behind the Niners, who were the short favorites, and the Lions at a 6-1 number. After that 2-2 start and out of the bye following week 5, plus 650. But then things started to turn quickly for the Eagles, including yesterday's win with a conference championship behind it. The Birds have now won 15 of their last 16 games, covering 11 times. They did enter the postseason with the second best price to win the NFC behind who was the 1 seed in the Detroit Lions. But the Eagles, once again, cashing that ticket, an NFC conference crown for a second time, Donnie, in the last 3 years.
They have one more game to play, but let's be honest with this. Could this be, Ben, the best offseason in the history of the NFL? And I'm not just saying that from an Eagles fan perspective here. So let's go over the moves they made. Let's start with the worst one, which was Bryce Huff. They signed for $17.5 million a year to be your superstar defensive end. The guy doesn't even get snaps in football game. He was out there to end the game in the final couple minutes when all the backups were in. Remove that from the equation. What did they do in the offseason? Let's go get Vic Fangio. We have the worst defense in the NFL. Well, how'd that work out? They're the number 1 defense in the NFL here. Unbelievable. Our offense really struggles with pre-snap motion and just being accessible and versatile. Let's go get Kellen Moore. Work down absolute spades. Let's head to the draft and get the 2 best cornerbacks in the draft in the first round who are immediate superstars in the secondary. And oh yeah, let's sign a backup special team, sometimes pass rusher in Zach Bond, who turns out to be the single best linebacker in football this year. And get CJ in the secondary to say, we need some toughness back there. Outrageous offseason by Howie Roseman. That's why they're here. And you know who I left out? Saquon Barkley, the best single season in the history of the NFL for a running back. That's an outrageous offseason.
Did you mention the draft and the guys that made plays yesterday? Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean?
I did.
Our guys?
Yep.
I mean,
They're
what
exciting.
an offseason indeed.
They're exciting.
For Philadelphia. Yeah, they are. More on the early line next.
Jimmy Butler has spread his cancer all over the Heat, and he has ruined their season. I do believe they'll never recover from this disastrous guy that is, purged on them. I mean, he's ruined. Like, they don't matter anymore at all. Like, I watched them play last night. They suck.
Pharrell, Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
There is going to be an energy to game time decisions that you will feel night in and night out. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. I want this to be the place that people come to. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Two guys that can do it all.
Too much electricity this morning.
This is a good time. We're having a lot of fun.
I had to do a triple take.
Ka-ching!
Why? Because of parity.
I didn't mean to offend.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
Load management is a dirty word.
Let him rip.
You know what? Circumstances provide the results.
What? How do you do this one?
Oh, Donnie, you got such a good show there.
A network that is booming.
The Early Line, only on SportsGrid.
Super Bowl 59 in the Big Easy. New Orleans, Louisiana, just 13 days away. And familiar foes now in the biggest game of each and every NFL season. The Philadelphia Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs. Twice in the last 3 years, matching up, hoping to grab and hoist a Lombardi trophy. Super Bowl 57 out in Glendale, Arizona, now 2 years ago. KC triumphant for its first of 2 consecutive Super Bowl championships, winning 38-35. We'll have plenty of time to look back on that game here are the early odds for this big game. 8.5 in favor of KC. Minus 132 now on that money line in a total of 49 and a hook. DRS, let's start with our perspective of those odds at the open. What are your early thoughts for Super Bowl 59 based on the numbers?
We're going to have a really close game, and that's what it's supposed to be. And again, the Chiefs are used to being in this spot and used to winning these football games. I don't think any Eagles backer fan or handicapper is going to be like, ooh, that line doesn't look right. Because if you would have placed it minus Eagles 1.5, it would have been fine. Anything below 3 either side, I would have been okay with it here because those are the expectations. Number one, Kansas City doesn't necessarily, blow teams out. Number two, the Philadelphia Eagles, yes, are a very good team, but just lost to the Chiefs 2 years previous. And if there's one team that's used to making Super Bowls and playing in big moments, it is the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, also, I want to say this. The good part about it is it's in a dome in New Orleans. The reason I say that is they can't roll in a playing surface that will be detrimental to one team, just like you saw in Kansas City and Philadelphia in the previous Super Bowl. The number one sack team in the history of the NFL was on ice skates the entire football game. That's not going to be the case in this Super Bowl. So I'm just hoping for no excuses here. I don't want to be angry at referees on bad calls. I don't want to look at the field and say it was sabotage. Just let these two teams play. And I believe that's going to happen in New Orleans.
Yes, I agree as well, Donnie. And once again, we see this number. Very, very short, marginal, in fact, in terms of the money line. What are we talking here? 32 plus 12. We're talking less than 50 cents of difference in terms of that money line distinction. It has been the story in the AFC with the Bills and the Ravens. Last night with the AFC Championship game between the Chiefs and the Bills. The Eagles have been a 6.5-point favorite for their recent games as of late in their last two. The Rams in the divisional round, yesterday in the conference title matchup against those Commanders. We mentioned it. Philly has won 15 of their last 16, entering New Orleans in Super Bowl 59. They have covered 11 times in that span. We also told you the history that Mahomes has seen in NFL playoff runs. On this dynastic march for KC, he is 17-3 straight up. Now, the second most wins ever by a quarterback in the history of the National Football League postseason, still trailing Tom Brady by a large margin. Brady has 35 in total, but moving past Joe Montana last night. He is also perfect, 8-0 against the number as a field goal favorite or fewer, or an underdog in his NFL playoff career. 5 times as a field goal favorite or fewer, which is what we probably will expect by the time we get to Sunday, 2 weeks from now. But DRS, let's talk about that time 2 weeks from now. 13 days away. When we kick off in New Orleans, inside the Caesars Superdome, will Kansas City still be the favorite to win a third consecutive Lombardi Trophy?
I do believe that. I do. And again, it just gets back to the notion. I've been using it all year. And Ben, you were so right to point it out. When the Super Bowl ended last year, and I said to myself, let me get this straight. An underwhelming Kansas City team went into Buffalo, Baltimore, and then beat a wildly more talented team in San Francisco in the Super Bowl. I don't care what happens. If you tell me Andy Reid's going to show up and Patrick Mahomes is going to show up without anybody else, I'm still taking them. So, and that still stands. Like, yes, I'm an Eagles fan. I will be cheering. But if you think it's easy for me to just go and say, outside of my fandom, press that button down on the Eagles getting 1.5 points in a game that I've been preaching about for the past 2 years, saying, you kidding me? The Chiefs just have to win this game, which is basically minus 1.5. How can I go against that? And I can't fault anybody there. And by the way, the Chiefs are getting better as the season goes on. Like Hollywood Brown coming back to that football team, being an extra outlet to take the pressure off of Xavier Worthy has been phenomenal. You just saw a playoff game where we're saying, hey, man, Kelsey's been on fire. Catch 19 yards worth of footballs, and they still won that game. They're using every single which way you can possibly win, which leads me to my next point. This is the best version of the Kansas City defense we have ever seen. Maybe the best defensive coordinator in football, paired up now with the talent he needs to succeed, where you're seeing games where you don't need the 368 yards and 4 touchdowns from Mahomes. Oh, my goodness, he's great. When you just need 225 and a touchdown and no turnovers is enough to carry the tide. This is a great game, but also, Ben, you look at that total, right? Close to 50. I just told you how good both of these defenses are with 2 weeks to prepare. That matters. But is anybody going to this game like, you know what? 17-14 final. You've got to be kidding me, man. These are two ultra aggressive teams with great playmakers on both sides of the football in a dome with turf. I think we're probably getting points here, Ben.
Yeah, I would agree, DRS. Both teams, by the way, over in their last two games, divisional round and conference championship round as well. Compare these numbers that we see there with the total, 49.5 to the Super Bowl matchup we saw in Glendale, Arizona just 2 years ago. The Birds closed as a slight favorite. Closing consensus spread 2.5 in favor of Philly. The over-under, 51 and a hook. Again, the Chiefs won outright as an underdog, which has not been the case often for KC in the playoff lives of Patrick Mahomes, but they were a dog 3 times last year in Buffalo, in Baltimore, and in the Super Bowl, won outright in all of those, and of course in Super Bowl 57. Total also went over 51 and a hook as the Chiefs did win. Final score 38-35. This year, DRS, Philly an underdog only 3 times. They have won outright in all 3, under in 2 of those 3 games. As we shared, KC continues its historic run. That includes just edging out teams ever so slightly. 17 consecutive wins in games decided by a single score, including a perfect 12-0 straight up in those games this season. We'll continue to dive through the early numbers for the Big Easy in Super Bowl 59. The Chiefs and the Eagles up next.
One of the weirdest nicknames I've heard in fighting. There's people have some strange nicknames at times, but the Lemon Killer. What do you even make of that? What is that about?
I don't even know what that means, but I'm gonna squeeze him like a lemon on the day we fight, and he's gonna pop.
Only on SportsGrid.
We're going to get rid of all the badness, if you will, over the past few decades for the Raiders and set yourself up for the future. It's a horrible job to take if you expect to win, but it's not a bad paying gig, so go ahead and take it.
With an owner in Mark Davis who has continued to make bad decision after bad decision. Does Pete Carroll leave a culture behind that Joe Brady in 2 to 3 years takes over?
The early line. Only on SportsGrid.
He did nothing for 5 weeks. So he is becoming his brother. So I don't want to hear about how great TJ Watt is with his 0 playoff wins. And he's the first guy to admit it. He comes right out and says, I've never won a playoff game. I don't matter. All right, at least we all know who the best player on the team is. It's George Pickens. If you don't believe that, well, then screw you, too.
Pharrell, Coast to Coast. Only on SportsGrid.
We'll see if they get McCain back. Kelly Oubre, Yabusele's been good. Caleb Martin's a defensive specialist. Andre Drummond can still give you, almost a double-double at any point. I can't go south on this team. And now you're giving it to me at 2-1 to make the playoffs? To be in the Final 8? Folks, give me the Philadelphia 76ers to make the playoffs at plus 210.
Betting above the rim. Only on SportsGrid.
Live right here on this Monday on the early line on SportsGrid following Conference Championship Sunday in the National Football League and taking that early preview of Super Bowl 59. The early odds and what it all means. 13 days away from the biggest game of any NFL season. The Eagles and the Chiefs in New Orleans with a Lombardi trophy at stake. Donnie, let's compare these two teams this year. We were just having the conversation during the commercial break. A 15-2 Kansas City team that when they have played all of their starters, they have won not just 15 games, but 17 of 18. They're 2 in the playoffs, excluding that Week 18 game in Denver against the Broncos. An Eagles team that has won 15 of their last 16 games, including a conference crown in the NFC for a second time in the last 3 years. This matchup in itself is historic. And of course, we will have the exact data from just 2 seasons prior in Super Bowl 57. How do you compare these two teams this time around?
And look, very good on both sides again. Expectations are high. The Eagles aren't just rolling into this game. Hey, for one of the young head coaches in Nick Sirianni, he's got a lot of victories under his belt and also now a Super Bowl game, which they lost. You can make those corrections. But also understand this, too, how we get to this point. Rest, of course, is always the major factor and ingredient. Andy Reid is sensational off of a bye. When the other guy doesn't have a bye, it's even more compounded. Now they both have the byes. But understand this, man. At the end of the season, when the Philadelphia Eagles lost to the Washington Commanders in Washington, a lot of people unhappy with me on the Eagles Nation. I said, you know what? This is actually going to help the Eagles out. Why? We wanted that number 1 seed. Because if it played out exactly the way it did, and if the Eagles would have beat the Commanders, Detroit still would have been the number 1 overall seed, and the Eagles would have went full gas against the New York Giants in that final game. Instead, they got the break. Why is that important now? Because Kansas City took off Week 18, then had a bye week, then was still home and only had to play the 2 football games, then gets another 2 weeks before the Super Bowl. At least the Eagles, having that early bye in September/early October, were able to get that rest in Week 18 and now get that secondary bye before the Super Bowl. That's massive. You should have 2 fresh teams. But the comparisons from the last time they played in the Super Bowl till now are pretty similar. The Eagles, who were favorites in that past Super Bowl, I thought were the better football team, should have won. We're up double digits. They didn't. It's Patrick Mahomes. It's Andy Reid. It's Kansas City. It's what they do. But now coming into this game where Jalen Hurts is like, okay, been there, done that before. Let's not make the same mistakes and fumble the football, which directly leads to a touchdown for Kansas City. Let's make every field goal we can get. Let's maybe stay more aggressive. And maybe the Eagles now, as crazy as it sounds, as talented that team was, you have more superstars on this team right now than you did in that last Super Bowl for the Philadelphia Eagles.
You also have a huge X factor and a difference in Saquon Barkley having a career and historic season for Philadelphia that will test everything Steve Spagnuolo is able to do for Kansas City defensively. What is so interesting about the Chiefs, again, making history last night, 9 teams ever in the Super Bowl era around the National Football League have won 2 consecutive Lombardi trophies. The previous 8, 3 reached a conference championship game, Kansas City becoming the 4th of 9. They are the only team ever to win back-to-back Super Bowl championships and even reach a 3rd Super Bowl. Various teams have made 3 consecutive Super Bowl appearances, but Kansas City the first to do so as a back-to-back champion, trying to become the first team ever in National Football League history to win 3 consecutive Lombardi trophies. But Donnie, the Chiefs were an underdog, ever so slightly, but still an underdog in their last 2 Super Bowls. 2 years ago against the Eagles, winning outright. Last season, of course, in Las Vegas against the 49ers, winning outright. Because of overtime last year, the total pushed to the over. 51 and a hook was the total 2 years ago between the Birds and the Chiefs. It went well over 38-35. 5 teams overall this year, DRS, including the postseason, have allowed fewer than 20 points per game around the NFL. The Chiefs and the Eagles are 2 of those 5. You talked about the total, 49 and a hook. We have 2 great defenses and 2 great defensive minds on display in New Orleans 13 days from now. But I still find it odd, or at least unlikely, this game is going to be a dead under 49 and a hook.
Yeah, again, we're going to have 2 weeks to analyze that, but just sometimes you take those first inclinations, which are usually the best ones. There's no way let's say I was talking about, there's no way I'm betting against the Chiefs this week, right? I look at this by saying, boy, there's no way I'm taking the under in the Super Bowl with this much talent, this many weapons, and we're not worried about 23-degree weather with chance of snow showers and windy conditions. You're on a fast track in New Orleans.
We'll talk more about the points, what we can expect offensively, and the quarterbacks next.
Jimmy Butler has spread his cancer all over the Heat, and he has ruined their season. I do believe they'll never recover from this disastrous guy that is, purged on him. I mean, he's ruined. Like, they don't matter anymore at all. Like, I watched them play last night. They suck.
Pharrell, Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
There is going to be an energy to game time decisions that you will feel night in and night out. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. I want this to be the place that people come to. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Two guys that can do it all.
Too much electricity this morning.
This is a good time. We're having a lot of fun.
I had to do a triple take.
Ka-ching!
Why? Because of parity.
I didn't mean to offend.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
Load management is a dirty word.
Let him rip.
You know what? Circumstances provide the results.
What? How do you do this one?
Oh, Donnie, you've got such a good show there.
A network that is booming.
The Early Line, only on SportsGrid.
The early odds for the biggest game of any football season. In New Orleans, the Chiefs and the Eagles for a second time in the last 3 years. A rematch from Super Bowl 57, now in Super Bowl 59. The Chiefs outright as a 2.5-point underdog the last time around, out in the desert in Glendale, Arizona, winning outright in a high-scoring affair, 38-35, over a total of 51.5. KC was down by 10, 24-14 at the break. They rallied in the final 2 quarters, setting up a Harrison Butker kick as time expired to give the Chiefs a victory with a controversial holding call in the final 2 minutes of regulation against Phillies defensive back James Bradbury at the time against Juju Smith-Schuster, who somehow, someway, still making impactful plays for the Chiefs offensively. But, Donnie, I do want to examine this total, 49.5. You and I have both said it feels uneasy to try to bet an under. And one of the main reasons why is I think if you look at those team totals, 25.5 for Kansas City, 23.5 for Philadelphia. I don't necessarily feel great about betting the under of either of those team totals, despite the dominant defenses on the other side. I think both teams get into the 20s. If that is my thought, I'm not giving myself a large edge or margin that I think this game stays under by. Could it be 27-21, 24-20? For sure, I'm still not walking away with an easy under where I did not sweat things out come Super Bowl Sunday.
You're right. And also look at the components that we have. And guess, we just told you that they're 2 great defenses here, but they're 2 great offenses. And with 2 weeks to prepare, and then you might say, okay, the defense gets equal footing as the offense because they each have the 2 weeks. But also, why were the Eagles hung 55 points yesterday in a game that we were looking at going like, all right, the Eagles' offensive line is banged up, and we don't think the quarterback can even move here. So you can zero in on the running back, and we'll see what happens. They scored 7 rushing touchdowns. Now you're going to get 2 weeks to say Jalen Hurts is all the way back and healthy. Saquon Barkley has 2 weeks now to relax after only getting 15. I say only 15 carries, as opposed to what you thought would have been 25 carries. And it's the same thing with Kansas City. You look at the offensive line, healthy, tight end healthy, wideouts healthy, running backs healthy here. This is going to be a slate where you're not worried about the biggest players, which is so great from a handicapping perspective. Let's just say you came in this game. Oh, Saquon pulled up lane with a hamstring injury. Oh, you got to wait 2 weeks to talk about it. How's it going to do? Or late in the game, Jalen Hurts hurt the knee again. Is he going to be fine? It's turf. Is he going to wear a big, bulky brace? We don't have any of that. I guess from an Eagles perspective, you're waiting to see on Landon Dickerson, which we're going to ask the doc coming up what that knee injury is going to look at. But you're getting full gas on both sides in an environment. You should be able to score points and understand this too. Let's just say Jaden Daniels had beaten the Philadelphia Eagles yesterday. Well, then come on now. He's going to go up against Mahomes. First time in a Super Bowl. They're not ready. We saw this 2 years ago. Do you think Jalen Hurts, who was a young quarterback at the time, was like, you know what? I hope to be back and I'll learn from it. You know what? He's back. Is he going to be like, boy, the butterflies are so much. I've never been in this spot before. Yeah. He's been there against the same team in a close game that they just lost. So for me, it spells more points than not, and also aggressive teams. We're not angling for field goals here. You're angling for touchdowns. You're trading 3s for 7s. That's a 4-point difference.
I think we saw last night as well, the game plan is still there. The blueprint, if you will, for ways of hoping to beat Kansas City in these incredibly important games. Field goals aren't going to get the job done. You still need to outpace a KC team that is by no means the best offensive power we have seen in this dynastic 7-year run. Saquon Barkley, by the way, his early rushing yards prop is 112 and a hook. James Cook had a big day. 13 carries, 85 yards, 2 rushing scores against that Chiefs defense. Nearly had 50 yards receiving as well. Of course, Saquon Barkley has been that critical factor for the Eagles offensively, which is why, Donnie, so many similarities, right? We have a Super Bowl rematch for the second time in 3 years. We've got one team that is playing in 3 consecutive Super Bowls, 5 Super Bowl appearances in a 6-year window. There are so many data points and so many areas of a sample size you can make comparisons to. Even last year, when it was the Chiefs and the 49ers, and a running back for KC's opposition had a better price to win Super Bowl MVP than the team's starting quarterback, or at least pretty darn close. Saquon Barkley has the second best price to win Super Bowl 59's MVP award in front of Jalen Hurts. Patrick Mahomes, of course, is the favorite. KC is the favorite to win yet another Lombardi trophy. And, just by the way, the 3 Super Bowls that Kansas City has already won with Mahomes as the starting quarterback, Patrick Mahomes has won the Super Bowl MVP hardware as well.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to see Mahomes. Obviously, they're the favorite team right now, plus 105, but it's easy just to look at Kansas City and say, what is the game script where Mahomes doesn't actually become the Super Bowl MVP if they win? It's Kareem Hunt getting 170 yards rushing? Probably not. Isaiah Pacheco? Nope. Is it the 3-headed monster wide receiver that you never know which guy's going to step up? So one guy has 88 yards is going to win that? It's probably got to be Mahomes. But also, it is interesting that you do see Saquon Barkley because we're human beings, or I should say human beings are voting on this, where sometimes you get a little nostalgic by saying, like, it's close. Saquon had that really good season here, should have got the rushing title in the regular season. Let's crown this by having the best running back season ever by giving him his Lombardi and also a Super Bowl MVP. But understand this. If you were looking at yesterday's game, who was the MVP? He said, what do you mean? Barkley went over 100 yards and scored 3 touchdowns. Saquon ran 3 in himself. Jalen ran 3 in himself and threw for 246 and another touchdown. It's not so simple when you look at it, because if the tush push was never the tush push, how many touchdowns does Barkley score this season and in the Super Bowl if he's getting all those goal line carries? Because that's where you get those vulture touchdowns by Jalen Hurts at that point. But it makes sense. Mahomes should absolutely be up there. Barkley, sentimental value plus 290, but then you can't count out Jalen Hurts at plus 380, and then everybody else who would need a miraculous game. Because if Kelsey has a big game, you know what's had a big game? Patrick Mahomes. That's why it's hard to do.
Yeah, and Donnie, I completely agree with you. We can examine this list for the next 13 days and say to ourselves, does Travis Kelce provide some value? What about if Xavier Worthy goes off? What if it's a defensive struggle and it is 17-14 and Chris Jones has 3 sacks and 2 forced fumbles? Sure, if the Chiefs win a Super Bowl, Patrick Mahomes is winning Super Bowl MVP. Now, I do hear the point about yesterday. Jalen Hurts, 4 total touchdowns, nearly 250 through the air. But when you watch the game still, I think everybody would have said the MVP for it was Saquon Barkley. I believe they give out NFC Championship game MVP. No, they don't? never mind. So we could have had that conversation be over. But still, I would argue that if the Eagles win, even with a similar path of what they did yesterday, where Saquon only has 118 yards and 3 rushing touchdowns, and Jalen Hurts has a phenomenal game, narrative-wise, for what Saquon Barkley has meant for this year's Eagles team, he's probably going to win the Super Bowl MVP award. But Jalen Hurts yesterday, 4 total touchdowns. In the first Super Bowl 2 years ago against Kansas City, a historic day, 304 yards, a touchdown. Was the Birds' leading rusher, 70 yards on the ground, 3 rushing scores, one of 2 players ever in Super Bowl history to have 3 rushing touchdowns in a single game. Jalen Hurts was historic. Had the Eagles outlasted the Chiefs there, he already has a Super Bowl MVP in the trophy case. So it is not like we are overlooking Philly's quarterback entering Super Bowl 59.
No, we're certainly not. And again, you're going to feed off of that because now you have the motivation. Yes, you wanted to get back to the Super Bowl, but don't you want to vanquish the enemy that already took you out? And from an Eagles fan perspective, why's it got to be so hard, man? Like in 2008, when the Phillies won a World Series, it was like fantastic. We got the Tampa Bay Rays. We didn't get the Boston Red Sox, the Yankees. Like, my goodness, how much is to overcome? To win in 2017, you had to be Tom Brady and the New England Patriots. Then you get back to the Super Bowl and you face up with Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. Then you get back there and you got to face Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. You want it, you got to go out and earn it. And Jalen Hurts understands that over the next 2 weeks, all eyes are going to focus on him. Mahomes is the greatest. Hurts is just a point guard that gets lucky at times. He's going to feed right into that and get ready.
No doubt about it. Can't wait for our Fade the Public poll to start hour 3 to see who the public thinks is going to win. Plenty of NFL news next.
Jimmy Butler has spread his cancer all over the Heat, and he has ruined their season. I do believe they'll never recover from this disastrous guy that is, purged on them. I mean, he's ruined. Like, they don't matter anymore at all. Like, I watched them play last night. They suck.
Pharrell, Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
There is going to be an energy to game time decisions that you will feel night in and night out. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. I want this to be the place that people come to. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Two guys that can do it all.
Too much electricity this morning.
This is a good time. We're having a lot of fun.
I had to do a triple take.
Ka-ching!
Why? Because of parity.
I didn't mean to offend.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
Load management is a dirty word.
Let him rip.
You know what? Circumstances provide the results.
What? How do you do this once?
Oh, Donnie, you got such a good show there.
A network that is booming.
The Early Line, only on SportsGrid.
Before conference championship weekend got started in the National Football League, it was late on a Friday night. Maybe you were out and about enjoying the start of your weekend. Maybe you were sitting at home on your couch watching a movie. You certainly were not paying attention to the NFL head coaching carousel, which is exactly where Jerry Jones wanted you. When the Cowboys named offensive coordinator the past 2 years at the Star, who did not call plays, mind you, that was Mike McCarthy's role, Brian Schottenheimer, Dallas's new head coach. Brian Schottenheimer is the new head coach of the once famed America's team, the Dallas Cowboys. Again, I am not trying to slander Brian Schottenheimer. Of course, an illustrious name in NFL head coaching circles. His father, the late Marty Schottenheimer, one of the most successful regular season head coaches you will see in the National Football League. And Brian Schottenheimer, of course, the familiarity in Dallas the last 3 years. But Brian Schottenheimer is the end result of a Cowboys head coaching vacancy. It is a slap in the face, in my opinion, DRS, from Jerry Jones to the entirety of the Dallas Cowboys fan base to hire Brian Schottenheimer as the head coach.
Yeah, it really is. And by the way, I like the concept that you use here, the coaching carousel. So let's go to the amusement park, Ben, right? You're a kid. Let's just say you're 10 years old. Dad, Mom, I want to go on the carousel. Cool, you go on that. Sometimes you get the big horse, the ones that go up and down. They're a lot of fun. Sometimes it's the horse that doesn't move, but it's still cool. And then you always see every couple rows, there's just a bench on the carousel. Like, imagine you as a kid having to get the bench on the carousel. No fun at all. That's the Cowboys here in the coaching carousel. They put their fans on the bench, not the bright horse that's going up and down. That's Ben Johnson. That's going to be running roughshod in Chicago. You got a head coach that inspires absolutely no confidence in your team. And understand this concept. Mike McCarthy was the coordinator that was calling the plays. You liked what he was doing. You got rid of him to now go to the other of the offensive coordinator, quote unquote, who wasn't calling the plays, who somehow sold himself as a better prospect than Mike McCarthy, which always leads us back to what the heck was Mike McCarthy actually asking for to be the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys? Was it $30 million a year, a 17-year guaranteed contract? Did he want to be part owner? Did he want to take over and fire Stephen Jones as the general manager? Like, what actually got him out of town, which they go, you know what? It was always Schottenheimer who was the guy here, Ben.
I don't get it, Donnie. Again, he is not some bright and plucky young offensive coordinator who is innovating offenses around the NFL like the world has never seen. He has been in Dallas for 3 years, an analyst in 2022, the OC only in title the last 2, because Mike McCarthy has been the guy calling plays. Of course, Brian Schottenheimer has had a say in what the offensive scheme looks like. Of course, he probably has a close relationship with Dak Prescott. But what this means for Dallas, once a proud franchise, is a disaster. A team that has not made the NFC Championship, now going on 3 decades. In fact, they're the only team of 16 in that conference, in the NFC as a whole, that has yet to reach a conference championship game this millennium or since 2010. Now with Jaden Daniels leading Washington there in his first year in the NFL. And here was a quote, I think, from Jerry. I don't even know if this makes any sense. From Jerry Jones to ESPN's Adam Schefter in the biggest of Friday news dumps you will ever see. Quote, Brian Schottenheimer is known as a career assistant. He ain't Brian no more. He is now known as the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. That is so dumb, I don't even know. The writer of Landman could not make Jerry act that out even close to what he just said. And the reason, Jerry, that Brian Schottenheimer is known as a career assistant is because he has spent a total of 24 years as an assistant in the National Football League, the very first back in 1997. He has been an NFL offensive coordinator now for 14 seasons. These previous 2 in Dallas. He spent 6 years with the New York Jets. Go look at those results. He spent a couple of years in St. Louis. He spent 3 years in Seattle. That made everybody question, could Russell Wilson still cook? And was not the offensive play caller the last 2 years in Dallas. Again, it is a slap in the face of a once proud franchise. I love to joke about the Cowboys and not spending Donnie's money or my worst enemy's money on the Cowboys to win an NFC championship, despite having one of the 5 best prices to do so each and every year, because they have not even reached the NFC championship since 1995. But if you are a Dallas fan and backer, this is the most disappointing news you could ever receive. Could Brian Schottenheimer have success? Sure. And I hope for him that he does, because he ain't Brian no more. He's the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. Do I predict that he is going to have success, or that Dallas will reach that pantheon of which we judge them by? No. The simple answer to it for me, Donnie.
All Jerry had to do was put out a poll on Twitter/X, like we do every single day here at the SportsGrid Network for Fade the Public. Who would you guys like as a head coach? And if you put Schottenheimer in that mix, he would have probably got the least amount of votes you could possibly get, regardless of who else was asking. Because sometimes all you want is to go outside the building, right? Look, McCarthy didn't work. It was his offensive coordinator. Then you're going to bring him in. And understand this, a couple years ago, when McCarthy went to the Cowboys, we all laughed at it. We all thought it was hilarious. And look how it turned out here. In an all-in season, you get embarrassed, you don't make the playoffs, and you go home. And your answer is, you know what? Not that I want to get the best coach out here. Let's keep the status quo in-house. And how do you know this was an indictment on Jerry Jones? He's a very smart businessman. I want this guy as my head coach. Nobody else wants him here. Release a statement when the press week is already over and the biggest weekend in the National Football League, AFC, NFC championship games are playing. Hopefully everybody forgets this and we can show up in training camp and be like, oh, that's right, they did hire Schottenheimer. Let's see how this works. Yeah. To avoid all that fan vitriol that you are going to get because your fan base is furious you did this and you tried to hide it at the last moment.
There is so much to say, but think about how Jerry Jones conducted this search, I say in air quotes. He kept Mike McCarthy on a string. They were unable to reach a deal so that they got started a week after everybody else that had a vacancy. A lot more on the coaching carousel next.
Jimmy Butler has spread his cancer all over the Heat, and he has ruined their season. I do believe they'll never recover from this disastrous guy that is, purged on them. I mean, he's ruined. Like, they don't matter anymore at all. Like, I watched them play last night. They suck.
Pharrell, Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
There is going to be an energy to game time decisions that you will feel night in and night out. We're going to go through every single thing, and I've got a great team behind me that's going to help me get the job done. I want this to be the place that people come to. We are going to hit every single one of those markets that you need to know about. There is not going to be a better place, I promise you, than Game Time Decisions. We will have everything at our disposal, and we will use that to our advantage. I'm Kevin Walsh. Tune into Game Time Decisions from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on SportsGrid.
Two guys that can do it all.
Too much electricity this morning.
This is a good time. We're having a lot of fun.
I had to do a triple take.
Ka-ching!
Why? Because of parity.
I didn't mean to offend.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
Load management is a dirty word.
Let him rip.
You know what? Circumstances provide the results.
What? How do you do this once?
Oh, Donnie, you've got such a good show there.
A network that is booming.
The Early Line, only on SportsGrid.
Around the NFL we go, but first we continue to talk about the Dallas Cowboys. Because again, Jerry Jones, as the owner of this franchise, seemingly the most powerful man in the sport, but certainly thinks he has the biggest ego in every room, is actively ruining the franchise that he claims to love from true winning ways just so he can retain some sort of power and control. They continue the conversations with Mike McCarthy for an extra week to only not come to a new deal, putting Dallas behind the 8 ball, because in that week that the Lions were off as the 1 seed in the NFC, the Cowboys were unable to interview Ben Johnson and or Aaron Glenn. So you missed out on 2 very attractive head coaching candidates in this cycle. And then, all right, now you have a head coaching vacancy. We'll put out the story about Deion Sanders to create a little buzz. Never actually had an in-person conversation with Coach Prime. All right, we're going to interview Brian Schottenheimer twice in person. This is not actually going to happen, right? This is just the mentality that Jerry Jones is going to keep somebody close to the organization and ultimately hire Kellen Moore. Wait, no, what? We hired Brian Schottenheimer and we tried to bury it at 10 p.m. Eastern time on a Friday night? Again, Donnie, if you were once a Cowboys fan or have any belief that Dallas can get back to the mountaintop in the NFL, how Jerry Jones conducted this coaching search is an absolute slap in the face for everybody associated with the Cowboys.
Like, you figure, like, when the Dallas Cowboys job comes open, there's a signal that says this is the biggest brand in sports worldwide, which is a huge factor. And number 2, they probably have more money to pay anybody as a head coach than anybody else in the league, or is willing to do that, which means the top talent should always flock to the Dallas Cowboys as a dream job and situation. And quite frankly, they're very non-hands-on with their own. Like, it's Jerry Jones usually is backing these guys. Even though we all thought McCarthy was getting fired this year, just, hey, let's say that right now. Like, let's see what we could do the rest of the year and see what happens at this point. He did it with Jason Garrett, and the Dave Campbell is like, he does have a long leash for coaches that he likes and is willing to work with, as opposed to like, hey, if you don't get the job done year number 1, I'll keep firing you till I get the right guy. But then again, you end up with Brian Schottenheimer, which is the least important. And understand this, Jerry Jones is getting older in his age. And sometimes if you think he's making the right head coaching decision, well, more power to you. But you figure as you get older, it's like, I just want to win one more championship. And he starts talking about we're going all in, which means I thought this all season was sign everybody, leverage our next 5-year salary cap into making us the best team we can be over the next year to year and a half. And all they did was go out and say, Mike McCarthy, you're fired. Schottenheimer, you're hired. You always knew we're going to hire a quarterback. Now he's the highest paid quarterback out there. Micah Parsons going to break the back seat, and you have nothing to show for it. That's the crazy part about this whole thing, because let's say something, whether or not it worked. If Deion goes to the Cowboys, you are throwing your fan base a bone that says, see that? I went out and got the lightning rod as coach that we expect him in the next 2 to 3 years to win a Super Bowl with. And you gave them absolutely no hope and no excitement, which is very anti-Dallas, to be honest.
Which it is. And Donnie, you mentioned how Jerry Jones has a long leash, and some people think that is loyalty. To me, it is not. It is the other kind of temperamental. It is a guy so in love with his own persona that he needs power, and he needs leverage, and he needs control. And that is why the Dallas Cowboys continue to have yes men to Jerry Jones as their head coaches, and that is why the Dallas Cowboys will not win a Super Bowl championship. Brian Schottenheimer might have success. And for the guy himself that has been in the NFL for 24 seasons trying to earn that head coaching gig, I hope that he does. But the ends will not justify the means for how Jerry Jones has conducted things within this Cowboys franchise the last few years. Other news around the NFL, by the way, the Chicago Bears filling out their staff. Their former head coach, Matt Eberflus, hired as the DC in Dallas. Actually a talented defensive mind that will get notoriety because of his name, but not a bad move. Declan Doyle, the young 28-year-old, now the OC under Ben Johnson in Chicago, was an assistant in both New Orleans and Denver this past season. Dennis Allen, former Saints head coach, now the defensive coordinator. Again, maybe not the most successful head coach, DRS, but a great DC in the NFL.
Yeah, and by the way, if you're looking for any job that you would want as a really young coordinator who, even though you're not going to call the plays in, just attach yourself to Ben Johnson. It has that feeling if they have any success in Chicago, it's going to turn into the Sean McVay tree where you can hold a cup of water for Sean McVay during a game. Like, I need that guy as my OC and head coach. And so, Declan, whoever you are, by 30, you're going to be a head coach. Watch it. Yep.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's a pretty good point. Joe Brady pulls out of the Saints head coaching search. Their former OC, Clint Kubiak, now in Seattle. Robert Saleh back in San Francisco as the DC. And hour 3 is up next.